Welcome to the Giving Business Soul podcast, where we speak with successful entrepreneurs who have learned to integrate soul and business, redefining leadership and ultimately utilizing business as a force for good. You got ecosystems in collapse, the environment degrading itself in real time, wars everywhere. Dopamine, rushes at every corner. I mean, certainly we've developed a society that certainly challenging for millennials, I think, and more than anything, really Gen Z. That's both my sons that are 20 and 18, about to turn 21 and 19. And it's... I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, I think in my generation, Gen X, as a 47-year-old, having like at least a facade of a normal world, that seemed to be in order. One thing to grow up in that, and then another to grow up in a situation where the entire world is pretty much in collapse. But, I love Neil Howe's book, The Fourth Turning, where they talk about sort of the different archetypes that emerge during these 20-year cycles of time. I don't remember exactly what he calls the 80-year cycle of time, the saculum. It's like a saculum or something like that. Exactly. And that saculum is like this 80-year cycle of time. And I think what's interesting about that, when you look at Ray Dalio's book about sort of the emergence of the New World Order per se, and you see the Mayan prophecies. It's like it's literally all coalescing into this time period we're in. And I don't find it at all, coincidental that this generation that's considered Gen Z, that's growing up in a world that's falling apart, is actually considered the hero archetype. So this archetype, they grow up in a society where the institutions that have sort of created the modern world are literally in decay and corruption and are falling apart. So this generation of heroes, this Gen Z, my sons are a part of it. And to some degree, I think I sort of raised them to be like Avengers. It's like you're growing up in the time period where we're going to have to rebuild, I think my generation, I think it's considered the generation of prophets, Gen X, So it's like we start to see what's happening and that there would be a necessity for sort of something new. And I certainly understand that. And as a father, I've been raising my sons to, have that sort of archetype in them of the hero, that they're here to rebuild. They're here to create a new way forward. And although the environment is, again, in collapse and everything along and associated with it, it's like that was their destiny, know? Yeah. So it's like they sort of signed up for that duty. And I feel like just the way we feel it, right? We come packaged, we come ready, we come equal to the task of the time period we're born in. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, it's interesting, like from what I can recall in the book, obviously we're moving through the period in crisis, right, where there's the most amount of tension. And he talks about like a 10-year arc where the crisis kind of really exists. Right? Yeah. And so, are we in it yet? I don't even know, really. I mean, I feel fairly comfortable. I feel, maybe COVID was the beginning of something, but it's kind of, right now, there's kind of this gap that we're in. But, has the 10 years started? Yeah. And there's this thing of like, it's going to go till 2030, 2032. Right. But we feel this turbulence. And, it is going to be our generation that needs to begin to reestablish like a correct pathway through this. And there is, I think I don't know, it's an interesting conversation because like, are we up for the task? Are we, because we're so distracted, we're kept away. We're here in the United States. We're like in our own little bubble. We don't really realize what we're doing to the greater whole of humanity because of our consumption and how deeply entrenched we are in our own structures in the logos, right? And it's an interesting perspective, but all of that, I think in terms of like the work that we do is how important it is to be prepared, and not to be in ignorance of where this thing is going and what can potentially happen. I mean, we saw the chaos that unfolded in COVID, and
Right.
that was barely anything, really. Like,
That
and
was the
so
tip of the iceberg.
imagine if the logistics, like of being able to transport food, something happens to that type of chain. What would we really be moved into, right, as a whole? And right, all that coming back to is like, can you remain centered in times of chaos, in times of crisis? Can you be useful in times of crisis, or are you going to be the person who's going and buying extra toilet paper, right? Sorry to call that into the podcast, right? But it's like it's completely different mind frames, and I think what you're sharing in terms of your sons is like you've prepared them to be able to be like giants in the midst of challenge, in the midst of chaos like that, and at least there we're productive.
Right.
Right.
Well, and I think there is, I mean, at times it does appear a bit hopeless, in the way that it's unfolding itself. But I think when you penetrate deeper into the veneer, into the facade, I feel that the reason we are seeing so much darkness is because simultaneously there's just a lot of love and innovation and a new way forward that's wanting to emerge. So as a result of that, it's like the old stuff is really starting to become very visible. And I think I always refer back to that idea that it is always darkest before dawn. And it feels to me that that's the phase we're in. And I think when you understand cycles of time and that things are not linear and that things are through rhythms and seasons, I rest my solace there, because I know that, that the light will come through, and we have to just be, like you said, anchored, centered in ourselves, understand that, that after winter, spring always comes, and just continuing on to, be somebody that is preparing a new way forward by being a living example of that. I think that's really the best that we can do. I think depending on your platform, depending on what your reach is, I think the greatest work we can do is just continue to come back into ourselves and continue to do the work of unleashing, sort of the greatness that's in us, because we all have it. And I think that's what we're discovering. It's just how powerful we are. I was seeing that on that Milton hurricane. It started off as like a category 2, 3, immediately jumps to a category 5. And I was attuned to a few prayer circles where they literally amass like a global prayer to diffuse that category 5. And they did it, at a very specific time, and they all got together and they did it all across the globe. And what occurred, all of a sudden, it certainly hit still Florida in a big way, but it softened its entry-level speeds. I don't know if it ended up coming in as a 3 or a 2. I believe it might have even come in as a 2. So, and what I heard a lot of those people that were a part of that prayer say is just like, we're coming to find out just how powerful we really are, and how much influence our vibration and energy, focus, and directed towards something can actually impact it. And we know that by science. I think it's called the Maharishi effect. It's an effect that I think happens in New Jersey or somewhere there, where they pray or meditate together as a group of high-level meditators. I think it was like 1,000 people meditating simultaneously in New Jersey, and they literally dropped the crime rate. That was the intention of the prayer and the meditation. It's called the Maharishi effect, demonstrating that collective intention actually has the ability to influence things. And so, I think as these, it feels like things are closing down on us, we're also simultaneously like learning really what the great potential is and what our ability is to influence our environment.
Yeah.
And I think that that's exciting. Certainly, it's not coming without, its set of setbacks and challenges and craziness. But I think that all evolution is preceded by a tremendous amount of stress and pressure. And I feel that that there is a divinity in the chaos that we're experiencing and the pressure. Because if that pressure if we utilize the pressure, it will call something greater out of our
Exactly.
genetic,
Yeah, exactly.
because stress is the precursor to evolution. The more the vehicle is stressed out, it develops an adaptable aspect or an adaptability to handle the new environment. So as our environment,
You're forced to learn.
yeah, you're forced to learn. I
something
mean,
new.
because if
Yeah.
not, you die. So,
Yeah. It's interesting why this is coming up. Last night I just watched a movie. It's called Dark Waters, and it kind of came on by accident. I was like going through
yeah.
Netflix, not really finding something. I'm like, and I handed it to Rosa, just like, hey, could you just choose something? And she like the first thing she clicks is like
Yeah.
Dark Waters, and it's a story of a man. I think I'm forgetting his name right now, but a story about the man who essentially investigated this company called DuPont. Which is responsible for creating the
Chemicals.
Teflon,
Yep.
the Teflon cover on the pans, and the POFAs, the
Yeah.
forever chemicals.
Wow.
And it's great. It's a great movie, and he's going through this process of uncovering it, taking them to court, going through this big litigation. It's a whole thing, and then they're about to win. They're about to settle, and then they decide they're going to contest. And he has this moment where he's saying that, this company has a tremendous amount of power. Like whatever they say goes in terms of who they can buy out in the government and things, just to keep this thing at bay from really coming out. And he's so frustrated. In the middle of his frustration, he says it's the government, the businesses, it's like the system's rigged. He's like, we have to figure this out. We have to care. We have to be the ones that care about these in this moment, the forever chemicals, and stop those things from getting into our bodies, because these industries are not going to do it themselves. They're not going to stop putting it into our bodies. We have to decide. And it was funny in that moment. It was like validating, because I have these like ceramic pots at home that were kind of annoying to use when I first got them. I mean, I love them now, but it's like, they're 100% ceramic, and I'm telling Rosa, I was like, see, it's like we have to be the ones to clean up our environment, because these companies aren't going to do it for us. Everybody does ceramic coated, right?
Yeah.
Which is like the minimal, but once that coating comes off, right, those are the chemicals coming back in. But all that to say that it's like it is up to us, and the pressure is being put on us to wake up, clean up, get rid of these things. We vote with our dollars type of idea, and to begin to pave a new path, and to give the money to the organizations that we feel like are supporting greener pastures per se.
Yeah. I think that kind of comes back to this idea and this realization that we have the power, as we can kind of get a little bit into the quantum or into the practical, like what I was talking about was the Maharashi effect and prayer and that stuff having an impact in environment. That's sort of more on that side of things. This is on more on the sort of practical. And just from a practical standpoint, if we stopped buying the stuff that we know is poison, those corporations have no other option than to fold or to adapt, to pivot, a pivot to
which is the buyout with PepsiCo and Siete, right?
Right.
It's like PepsiCo is realizing that the current products they have on the shelves aren't quite meeting the demand of the market, so they're going to buy out Siete, which is doing things correctly, because they know if they invest here, they're going to pick up their profit margins.
Right.
So it is like a glimpse at like a pivot happening, because it's like they want whatever gives them the money.
The corporations are a mirror of human consciousness, so it's like essentially we can't blame them, because we're participating in that relationship dynamic. We can say, oh, you're the evil one, but it's like, what does that make us when we know what something is poison and yet we still consume it? I can say that that's a level of evil that you're doing to your own body. So the corporations are simply a reflection of where the quality of the consciousness is of the collective. Yeah. If more people pulled back on that and said, hey, I'm no longer gonna, pollute my body and hurt it. It's again, the corporations immediately pivot, because what they're looking for is what they're defined for, profit. Yes. That you can't break that. Yeah. That's what they're going to go after. But we can demonstrate what we want as a collective, and then let them sort of pivot into that.
Yeah, yeah. Which is, I think the beauty of the power structure that we're moving into, right? Like where the government, you have to vote with by going to the polls, you know, in the business power structure, you vote with
Exactly.
your money and the things that you invest in, and understanding the impact of those things, I think is of great importance.
Well, and I think too, like it's like no longer being ignorant of that stuff. I think you have to understand that you're being poisoned. I mean, 70% of people in the United States are obese, all sorts of autoimmune issues. I mean, we're being poisoned. Recently in Congress, I forget the lady's name. She's a doctor, and her husband, their mother passed away due to pharmaceutical drugs. They were on the Joe Rogan show, and they're starting to make a lot of progress inside of the domain of bringing this to the attention of of society. And they were showing Fruit Loops from Canada that are colored in like real grape and watermelon juice, and then you got the ones over here in the United States being colored by artificial dyes like red 40 and I don't know what, yellow 20, what have you, but all essentially endocrine disruptors, you know, issues that happen downstream from your health standpoint. So it's like that's also occurring simultaneously, where it's like more and more, it's making its way into the public eye in a really, really big way. And not to jump into the politics side of it, but with Kennedy really kind of promoting that idea of healing our health as a nation, it's starting to put a spotlight there.
Yeah, and you know what's coming to my mind is it's right now what we lack as individuals is there's so much information, like we're saying. It's easy to get distracted and caught up in this whole thing, and that for average people it's challenging to find your way out of the maze, because that's what it is. It's a maze. You have to get informed, you have to put energy in this direction. And oftentimes I think for a lot of people don't realize, and this is what I like to say, they don't realize what we're sacrificing through our ignorance. We think it's just the soda. We think it's just these things that we're, you know, just this one moment. But little do we know how these foods, these programs, this music, all these things that we tune into, how they're dampening our spiritual bodies. And that, I think, is what we sacrifice in all of this. And so you could imagine, it's like, I like what you just said in bringing up Kennedy, because if we clean up the food system, the soul inside of our being is given an opportunity to emerge more clearly through the biology of our system, right? But it's like it's dampened until we correct that. And, you know, for me, giving business soul and what we're doing here is a pathway to help work through that labyrinth, work your way out of the maze into your power, right? To get clear within your body, within your own emotional life, the debris that you're carrying in that area, so that you can show up at your best and your highest, right? It's like the moment somebody's given the, you know, like the map of how to get out of the labyrinth, how to get through and out of the labyrinth, boom! It's like what is like the default experience is the soul begins to emerge more clearly. So for me, in all of this that we're talking about the youth and the crisis and all these things, I feel like what we've been doing all these years is creating a path for people to get out of the matrix and find their way into their best and strongest self, so that we can be productive human beings in the world.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to segment what we're doing as Giving Business Soul. And I think for me, that path and that awakening really kind of got started back in 2012, and really understanding that, you know, we're moving into a brand new time period altogether. And that's really where I began the inner process, and now sort of walking that path, walking that labyrinth, figuring out a way to get out of that thing so that you can sort of like proverbially break out of the matrix, if you will. Because what we have been programmed in society is to just kind of follow the herd. And as you can see, if you follow the herd, you're going to be in some danger at this point. And coming off of that and finding the labyrinth and getting the way out physically as well as psychologically, and now having actual maps for people, you know, and letting them know that, hey, if you are serious and you really want to sort of become the best version of yourself, through proven methodologies in psychology and learning how to heal properly from an emotional level, and then adopt a blueprint of well-researched, by the individual, meaning this merchant embodiment blueprint that we've created, really, and having it tested on myself, and sort of became a human laboratory to optimize my health and my vitality and my energy, and approaching it differently, really from the cellular level, and how is it that I can create vitality energetically as well as, again, psychologically, and now being able to provide that for entrepreneurs. Because what we are seeing too, is that certainly the world is collapsing. The institutions are showing corruption, and we are also migrating into a new power structure, right? And power structures are always seen and can be identified by simply looking at who has the largest buildings on the landscape. And this is a frame that we offer entrepreneurs as a way to kind of enroll you into a new potential, a new story, right? Because the power structures have always existed. And the first power structure really was the kingdoms, because the castles at that time were the largest buildings on the landscape. And that's when the kings and queens really directed us. Eventually, castles give way to church buildings. And at that point, all of a sudden, the priests and the popes are starting to kind of, dictate and create all the rules and laws based on, religious authority. Eventually, people got tired of that, and they broke out of that in the about 1600s with, the Protestant movement moving out of the Catholicism. And all of a sudden, now you have a new power structure that emerges, which is government, right? The government buildings started becoming the largest on the landscape, with capital buildings of states and countries. And then this is the era we're leaving, because this is where presidents and politicians had the most amount of power. And that's been great. It's been an evolution, and that's been necessary. But what has now occurred is that the largest buildings are no longer the government buildings. It's now business. So business is the current dominant power structure. And that means that there is an opportunity like never before, where entrepreneurs can simply adopt a new way of being, a philosophy, and begin to demonstrate a new way forward with this power structure, instead of succumbing to old structures, old paradigms, and instead of succumbing to the greed that we know that business has. It's like, can we do it differently? But we couldn't do it back there with the castles. We couldn't do it with the government, the churches. None of that was possible. It hasn't been possible until right now. So we are literally in a window of time where prophecy is coalescing, where geopolitical changes and the foreturning are happening. It's literally all coalescing for this amazing romantic time to be alive, where the old world is dying and a new one is emerging. And who are going to be the wayshores? Who are going to be the individuals that say, hey, there is a new way forward. There's a new philosophy. There's a philosophy in business that can actually benefit our humanity. And that's what we're bringing forward for individuals in the entrepreneurial world, is that giving business soul is a philosophy. It is a philosophy that not only really kind of colors a new way forward, but simultaneously offers an archetype that we can adopt as an internal North Star that can ultimately transform our consciousness in a way where this new philosophy of business can be embodied, and that's really the game. And if you're listening, it's like, imagine a world with entrepreneurs that are soul-centered and that have organizations that are benefiting and are here for the betterment of humanity. Imagine, there's millions of entrepreneurs across the planet. And if their organizations were like what we have here at the Mortgage Phoenix Group, where we're building homes for women and children, imagine, again, an entire globe of organizations that have adopted that philosophy. And that is the end game for Giving Business Soul, is to offer this philosophy, these blueprints, these maps to transform your consciousness so we can do business in the new way. And that's the new human story. What happens when that potential becomes materialized? Well, that's I think the world that we all want.
Yeah, and it's like a true democracy in that way because you're voting with your dollars,
Yeah.
and it's a decentralized version of
Absolutely.
it, right? Because the market decides if a company wins or loses, and as long as we're providing to the market a superior product, right, then we get the power per se through the money and the resources, and what we're saying is you can dictate how you use those resources, and there is productive ways to use them in a way that is incredibly like an adventure, right? It's like, what can you accomplish in a single lifetime, right? Like, it's like, that's a big question. Like, you have all the time you need, you have a lifetime, and
In a new landscape.
yeah, and that I think I think like you're saying, it's like a romantic time, right? It is an incredible opportunity. It's funny, at the beginning when we first opened, we're talking about how challenging it is,
Sure.
right? And it is.
It's a crisis. It's a crisis. And in
if
Chinese,
you can work through
yeah.
the maze, through the
Exactly.
labyrinth, you see there's a tremendous opportunity that's
Exactly.
actually never existed in history,
That's right.
right? Like, you just had Betty Kovacs before this episode,
Yeah.
and I mean, she is bringing in such a necessary narrative in terms of the history of like how we've arrived here. And I remember reading her book and just being so astounded, just like the fact that I am beginning to understand how we got here in the first place, right? And what we're moving towards, our ideal isn't some fantasy or some dream, some how people like to think that this is just fantastical thinking. It's like, it's actually a memory from a time when this type of thinking, where we lived in accordance to cosmic law, right? Where we were soul-centered individuals living on the earth, right? And that's how we directed our plans, our lives, like our society. And then, if you read her book, you get to understand like how we fell out of that, and how certain bad players came in and essentially cut off lines of connection to that type of understanding, to our own divinity in that sense. And then boom, we get moved into the dark ages, right? And it's like, but this is the first time in history where we can actually have access to all of the information in history to stitch together the actual storyline of what's
There you
occurred.
go.
And that, I think, is an incredible opportunity, because once we are informed,
Yeah.
right, it's like people can kind of, the logos, right, the logic in us can validate, like, okay, this makes sense, and if it makes sense, then we can continue moving on. But if it's only the mythos, if it's only the the ideal, because that's what we feel or that's what we say, then some people don't come along for the ride. But the moment you can satisfy the mind and give them that peace, I think is something really special. So we're living through that time where that information is available. We have access through even this medium of a podcast to be able to
Right.
communicate that there is even a path, there is a way out of the labyrinth, that I think makes this, it is giving us an opportunity to break through.
Yeah, and I think that piece that we found with Betty Kovacs in the book, The Merchants of Light, was significant because, not that she's the only one on the trail, but it's very evident that humanity took a wrong turn at some point. But beyond that, I think there's been a stitching of a human story that was completely falsified as a way to sort of keep us locked into a reality. And this 6,000-year template, is completely faulty. And not only is she bringing a lot of understanding to it and light, but several other scholars and individuals that are starting to see it. And where's the evidence? It's in the megalithic sites, right? In the megalithic sites that are now starting to surface everywhere around the planet. They're starting to see that they're much older than 6,000 years old. I think the smoking gun is Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, that is dated about 10,500 years BC. That clearly indicates that you had a knowledge base that doesn't fit into the old narrative. It doesn't fit. We were supposed to be hunter-gatherers at that time, and to create a sophisticated structure that is football fields big with coatings of,
In alignment with stars.
in alignment with stars and things like that. It's just like, we've been told a big lie.
There's the evidence that we used to live in accordance to
Exactly.
cosmic law.
Yeah.
Right.
And
It's just that those structures that took years upon years to build, like, that was a priority for these cultures.
Right.
Right.
Right. Imagine that, right? Where that becomes where they have sufficient time to build and to understand the cosmos to that degree. And certainly, I think the one that is the biggest smoking gun of all is really Egypt. Egypt, if you want to study spirituality, you want to study origins, it's like there's this saying that's all roads lead to Egypt, right? Because those structures are much older than what we've been told. The lie that they've been developed with pulleys and and little hammers and whatever is completely false. And what Egypt is considered is a metrology, and what a metrology is that it's buried within the actual structure of the Giza pyramids, 150 constant units of measurement that our humanity is essentially now coming to know. What I mean by that is that embedded within the structure, you have the inch, you have the meter, you have the centimeter, you have the circumference of the earth, you have the distance from the earth to the moon. I mean, all of these things were embedded, and it's just like, come on, there's just no way that they did that. And then I think the biggest piece inside of that is if you look up the coordinates of Giza, type in coordinates of Giza in Google, and then type in coordinates of light.
No, speed of light.
Or speed of light. Yeah, thank you. So coordinates on the Giza pyramids, and then the speed of light. And you will see that those numbers are identical.
Exactly the same.
They're exactly the same. So that means that the ancients built the Giza plateau to give us an indication that it was, built on this sort of light, or
and
this,
we feel like we just discovered the speed
Yeah.
of light.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, come on.
It's like, and they're like, hey, we're a few steps ahead of you here.
Yeah, exactly. And the person that's really researching this and I think bringing it out in a really big way is Robert Grant. If you haven't been following Robert Grant, you got to follow him on Instagram. And he's a polymath, somebody that feels that he's been really getting a lot of insight from Da Vinci, and decoding a lot of Da Vinci's work, as well as decoding a lot of the Egypt and what's been embedded within the actual architecture there. And his concept is very similar to mine in the sense that he says that the secrets of the Giza pyramids are becoming revealed to us as a function of our own development in consciousness. So the more conscious we become as human beings, the more the secrets of Giza in the pyramids are starting to reveal themselves, which is a saying that I've been sharing for a long time, is that what we become aware of depends on your level of development. Like all the secrets have been here. They've been here all along, but it just has been a function that we haven't been aware and awake enough to actually decode what's been here, and the more that we're starting to sort of piece it all together, the more the great truths are coming out. And that's why we are in the apocalypse. The apocalypse is no reason to be scared. It's actually a reason to be excited. Why is that? Because apocalypse simply means it's the great unveiling. Well, what is being unveiled? The truth, right? These lies that have been used to propagate a human story that has been false has been a lie. So the veil is coming down so that the revelation happens. What is the revelation? It's the great truth that we are all cosmic divine beings and that we have the ability to anchor in the kingdom here, to bring heaven into the earth, to become the conduits of divine will. And when enough people figure that out, we can't be stopped.
Yeah.
And that's really what the book of Revelation is all about. It's a coded metaphoric story that really depicts that when this consciousness of Christ comes back, and we're now very clearly in this process. And you can be, again, scared, or you can be excited and be a part of the new human story that's emerging out. And our sense is that it's going to come through individuals that want to demonstrate a new way and who do the work of reconciling the pain that we have in the vehicle and the human body individually, and do that. That's the great work. And the more people do that and break themselves out of the matrix, which is, again, just clean up the pain and the debris of the psychology that you've inherited going through the earth, as well as purifying the human body. You clean up your psychology through the healing. You clean up your body through eliminating all the toxins and poisons that the construct in the matrix has fed you, if you can succeed in that, that's the game. Succeed in that, and then you become the greatest version of yourself. And then what do you do with that version?
Yeah.
You establish businesses that are giving back and doing great work. Well, that's the goal.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because, while we're on the subject of Betty, and you're talking about some of these narratives, and sometimes it can be a little fantastical, right? And in her book, I love how she does this, right? She breaks up the mythos and the logos, and the understanding of our necessity to bridge these two worlds of mythology and logic, mythos, logos, right? And because in the Western world, we focus on the logos. We value the logos. We value the linear, logical, kind of concrete science, practical stuff. And that's gotten us this far. But we're so entrenched in the logos that we've completely ignored the mythology, the mythos. And the mythos is such a necessary aspect of our psyche, right? So I believe it's left brain is logos, right? Right brain is mythos. Right brain is creative. But we're so focused on the logic that we've completely missed another hemisphere of our brain, which is the mythology, the creativity, the story, right? And how the mythology, it plays an incredible role in our society, really, in many ways, right? This idea that the way that we used to pass down information in the past is through stories, right? I mean, those stories were myths. They came encoded with information. And the reason that we needed these myths is because they were communicating things that you can't clearly see through the mind, through the left hemisphere, right? The logic. The mythology is informing us. And so when we think in terms of giving business soul, right? Business is the logos, it's the logic, it's the things that we're doing in the material world. The soul is of the mythos. It's coming from another dimension and it's bridging through the body into the world.
That's right.
Right? And sometimes we get caught up. A lot of people dismiss any talk about soul and spirituality and this type of thing because we only prioritize the logos. But little do we know that's why we lack meaning in our lives. Because we don't have this other connection to a deeper aspect of our being. And so the work and the role is to begin to bridge these two worlds, right? And to normalize it, really. I think the challenge is that's the other book, Tyranny of Words. The challenge with the mythos is that, it can also be distorted. People can misinterpret stories and things like this. And so we're looking for individuals who have a clear, embodied experience of what they're kind of bringing in, what they're sharing, where the context is. But all that to say, right, like how important it is that we begin to stop kind of judging and interfering with the mythos language, right? Because we need to begin to become familiar with that realm, that dimension of the creative side of our brain in order to access the soul. And I think Betty Kovacs would reference it as the heart, right? To be able to, the heart consciousness. It's like there's a whole well of potential in there that is trying to make its way through you as a individual. But if you don't prioritize the emotions, if you don't prioritize these invisible dimensions inside of your psyche, well, good luck accessing the soul, right? The real depth and well of potential there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I do feel like when it comes to this discussion of logos and mythos, I think the first thing that needs to occur is that I think individuals need to understand that there are these two spheres of knowledge per se, and that they're both necessary for the overall human condition. The issue that the planet has had is that this mythos has sort of went underground and disappeared, and now what we're starting to understand is that both of these spheres are extremely important. And I love the way that Betty sort of defined those, because like you said, logos is of the mind, the mythos is more of the soul. So the logos is what she calls the myth of survival, and then the mythos is is the myth of meaning.
Yeah.
right? So they're both necessary. We need the mechanisms of survival, but in order to make this life fulfilling, we need meaning, right? And what we've been doing is only the myth of survival. And that happened because that myth, the mythos, again, sort of went underground and got cut off from our humanity starting in 621 BC under the Josiah, the king of Jerusalem, and the Deuteronomist that she writes about, where the mythos started to get,
We start denying it.
we start denying it.
It doesn't exist. It's a
Right.
sin to even explore these
Right. Yeah.
realms.
I mean, you're now killed for essentially wanting to understand the mythos and the meaning and different things like that. Anything that had to do with that was suppressed, repressed, killed off, and so that's I think an important element to understand that there are these two sort of knowledge spheres. Both are important. And what happened is that this mythos one that is for meaning and for the soul is beginning to reemerge itself because we're starting to understand its necessity in the overall human condition. And this is the one that is evolutionary potential, right? Because it's speaking directly to the soul, and in speaking to the soul, it develops, a memory and understanding of why it's here as a soul.
Yeah. So why I brought this up was because you brought up the Christ, right? And when the logos, somebody of the logical mind relates to the word Christ, it can be distorted through what the logos, the Western cultures have done to have us believe about religion and God and these times. But the mythos, right? The myth of the Christ is a whole other story of dimension that the logos that our logical mind needs to begin to understand. There's an encoded story in the myth of Christ and portrayed through Yeshua's life, right? But it's like encoded with deep meaning for our soul, right? It's just but you can't interpret it with the logos. You have to learn to interpret it through the mythos, through the creative aspect of your brain, to begin to really receive the codes that are condensed within the myth, right? Of the life that he lived and the story that he's the legacy he's left behind, which is like a roadmap, right? It's a roadmap to do your inner work. But because the logos, right? Because our society values the logos, we hear things like that and we're immediately turned off. We're immediately just want to, these guys are just talking such and such, right? But this is, again, we have to learn how to suspend that, right? And really be open. And also this aspect of like, take what serves you, leave what doesn't. Like, don't let certain terminology turn you off or turn you away from. Obviously, if you're tuning into this podcast, you're tuning in for a reason. But it's like it is one of the challenges when we're speaking to anybody who's outside of the transmission, who's outside of the awakening, is that they're still in the logos. And so until you kind of satisfy the logic side of some of these things, they're not really going to be paying attention.
Yeah, it's a difficult leap for people, and I feel that an aspect that helps to make that leap is that if you do research on the Roman Empire, I would start there, because if you look at what's happening now and you're starting to see corruption and you're starting to see that, hey, these power structures, they're not all they crack up to be, 100 times worse in the Roman Empire. So when they bring out a religion, because it was considered the Holy Roman Catholic Church, so they essentially are parading around the deeds of this great man and cloak it in a way that still gives them dominion, power, and authority. And I think if you start there and understand that, hey, why did this Holy Roman Catholic Church hide the true teachings? And I think if you just have enough courage to like start to go, okay, well, what was his native tongue? Where was he born? Is there any literature available outside of the domain of the church? Because what we're suggesting is that his life is actually a template. It is the way forward, but more specifically, it becomes a more empowering way forward when you take it out of the corrupt structure. and you study it there. And again, take whatever you want, leave whatever you want. But you have to understand that the entity that began to parade this around was corrupt. It was completely corrupt. So why would they give you a pure teaching? They couldn't.
They're not going to give you the keys to your own freedom.
Exactly.
Where you can't be controlled, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, inside of some of these myths, right, and the codes that are left behind in his story, we can traverse the inner world and begin to have access, right, to bring out what is within us in this aspect that will save us in this lifetime to become who we need to be, and it becomes very, very important, and that's why it's challenging to speak about soul and not bring up some of the myth of this individual. I mean, there's obviously other stories, right?
Of course.
And we certainly hold the synthesis, right? It's like it's not just
right
his story, but he's giving us the template, and that's an easy one that we can kind of break open to people who are interested in learning more about it. But yeah, bro, I'm wondering if maybe we can pivot a little bit.
Sure.
Part of earlier we were talking about the power structures. We're talking about kind of current climate of things. Can be a little distracting, but there's also pathways, all these different things. I would love if you could share this story that you have with Donald Trump as an evolutionary catalyst. I think that would be a really interesting frame to be able to share with people.
Yeah. So Trump is an evolutionary catalyst. So what that really means, this is something that I've been sharing a lot, because the way that I assist individuals to begin the process of learning the terrain of inner work and how to properly heal is this concept and this understanding that whenever anything upsets us outside of us, that upset, that trigger, that irritation, that within it contains the codes necessary for your own transformation, your own evolution. And the reason that Trump is such an evolutionary catalyst is because he pisses so many people off, right? There's an actual psychological, I think, what would you call that?
Trump deranged syndrome?
Yeah, it's called Trump deranged syndrome. But I mean, there's actually like a psychological implication in what this man creates for people, and it's called TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. And I think that's spectacular if you understand the idea that whatever you judge about him, whatever irritates you about him, 99% of the possibility that you own the same damn fucking quality. You own the same quality in you. And it's harder for you to see it in yourself, so you pin it on, this evolutionary catalyst of a figure. So if you believe that he is a misogynist, if you're or believe that he's a racist, look at where you've been racist. Where have you not cleaned up the time that you did a racist act? If you feel like, that he's a misogynist, where have you disrespected women? Where have you not cleaned that up in your own life? The reason that it provokes such a massive irritation for so many people is because that character was necessary for our humanity right now to cause this thing to rise in the way that it is in so many people. And if you can suspend your critique, your judgment, and look at where you own the same qualities as him, it can give you the indication of where you are needing to clean up stuff in your own life. And the game is to get to a point where he doesn't upset you, that you can watch it neutrally. You can see it like you're watching a movie and curious and, interested, but not irritated, and I think if you can arrive to using him for that method, you will bow to him later on, and not in a way where you're going to glorify him, but just thank you. Because I know in my life, I judged him early on for an event that he did. And what had come through for me was that he was insidious, and that he did whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, however he wanted. And I just thought it was a very insidious act that he did with the Keystone Pipeline back in 2017. And it upset me. It irritated me. I got really angered. And so I said, okay, Francisco, you know the game. Why does he anger you? He's in your mirror. Polish your mirror. And I started to look at all the ways that I was insidious as a leader, as a father, as a devotee of God. and said, holy shit, I'm doing the same thing everywhere. And I started to clean that up. I started to address those crevices in my psyche where I was like, oh man. And I did it in silence. I did it in quiet and started to look for any areas that I was that way. And lo and behold, I became a better leader. Lo and behold, I became a better father. So, I feel that given the polarity of the political environment, if he's pissing you off, look at it through that lens.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know about the bowing part. But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as soon as I said it, I was like, I don't mean it that way. It's just like
it's just saying thank you. I now see what I couldn't see
exactly.
before. Right?
As
Through you, I see what I could not see before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way to say
so
it.
I understood that.
Yeah. In spiritual psychology, we call them stackers. The individuals that come into your life to kind of create emotional upset so that you can move to your next level.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you can't heal, right, unless you become aware of your material. Right. Like you cannot evolve as a soul if you don't know where your material is.
Right.
And what you're sharing there is that, Trump is helping people's material to come up. Exactly. Right, especially the way in which people can be so ugly towards another person, right? That's your material right there. That ugliness lives inside of you.
Right.
So like own that piece versus denying it.
Right.
And I think that's often what we do is we just deny that we have, that's him. He's
that's
the worst
him.
one. I don't have my own shadows, right? But it's like when we begin to understand, like take what's yours, right? And then when taking and owning what's yours, you begin to neutralize it inside of you. And so suddenly this individual doesn't become such a trigger.
Right.
You can witness him more clearly. You can see the situation more clearly from a higher vantage point, not being so emotionally enwrapped in this whole thing when that's exactly what the system wants, which is to emotionally manipulate you and out of fear get you to make decisions, right? So it's like boom, your power is being taken away in that sense. Right? But when you learn to do what Francisco just shared and being able to own your own aspect of these things, boom, that ownership allows it to integrate, and suddenly you get to choose who has dominion over your psyche and your thinking and your emotions and things like this. So it goes the same with anybody else in your life, your spouse, your family, your dog, whatever it is that's pissing you off, that irritates you, is giving you an opportunity to look at the shit, right? That's inside your own psyche that you need to take care of. But it really does cause or catalyze an evolution.
It's your triggers are your instructions, right? Your triggers are your instruction. That's when you're triggered. That's what we have to work on as a society now, is to understand that we, not the system, are the ones that are propagating the entire thing, right? Because what we witness in our reality is the aggregate of all of our consciousness, right? So you imagine you got 7-8 billion people with a lot of unresolved material, and they're projecting it on the screen of our matrix reality, right? So the more we start to pull back our own shadows, our own emotional upheaval towards that thing just collapses. Now certainly, you got billions of people, but if more and more people start to do that, I think that's really what's going on. That's why it's collapsing.
Well, it's like, what's coming to mind is how, right, like that idea that we will continue to be at war, right, in the global stage, the global arena. We will continue to be at war because we are at war within ourselves.
That's correct.
Right? When the recent conflicts are happening out in the Middle East, you saw a lot of ugliness come out of people on social media. You just see that in the comment sections, right? It's like they're calling to kill the other side, right? And it becomes this, that is literally why there is war happening, because you are calling for somebody else on the other side to die.
On either side.
But what that is a mirror of is that you are in conflict within yourself. You are at war within yourself, and so you project that onto the world.
Right.
And until you address the conflict inside of your own psyche and establish a sense of peace, you will continue to participate and propagate that which you don't want to see in the global stage.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's not one bit coincidental that where the conflict is, the one that has the probability to move us into Armageddon, World War III, is being conducted on the site where, Yeshua was born, where that consciousness comes out of, right? He was born right there in that area. And interestingly enough, that area, both the Giza Plateau as well as Jerusalem, is considered the fifth chakra of the planet. So if you
That's
look,
the voice?
that's the voice,
Okay.
which represents truth. So if you Google, 7 chakras of the earth, you'll see where the 7 chakras
There's
are.
like Sedona, there's Mount Shasta.
No, it's Mount
or-
Shasta is the root. Peru is the sacral.
I mean, you don't have to go through all
Yeah,
of them.
okay, but yeah, so yeah, Australia, and then anyways, so yeah, there's 5 or 7, and the 5th one is there in Jerusalem, and that so represents truth, and so it's like the conflict is in the area where this great man births this consciousness, this Christic Christ, and becomes the embodiment of that, and then it's on the area which represents truth. So I do certainly feel like what you're saying is that when we begin to come into harmony and into peace within ourselves, it will have a global impact. And I believe that when sufficient of us do that, that's where, we have sort of the final revelation come through, which is where we reestablish, the kingdom here, per se. Yeah. But yeah, it is a fascinating time to be alive, to see these conflicts in real time. And certainly it can, one of the roles I feel that I play inside of this is that a lot of people that are very much into the spiritual domain tend to kind of turn a blind eye towards the conflict. It's sort of a form of spiritual bypass, if you will. I prefer the witnessing of those things so that, one, I'm understanding of what's transpiring and what's on the surface and what's what is coming, per se. And I believe that that's also a necessity, that if you are in this work of showing a way forward, we cannot turn a blind eye to the suffering. We also have to utilize that suffering and that pain as alchemy, as a way to continue to fuel this desire to help our humanity, in a big way. So I don't get involved per se in posting stuff about it, but I witness it. And the witnessing of the horror that is happening on both sides of the equation, it does not matter. It's like people are dying, and people are dying for no reason, innocent people. I've been a big Games of Thrones enthusiast, and so I'm constantly watching. I watched that whole series.
I did not know that, bro.
Yeah, I love that series, and yeah, and I was very let down, like the majority of Game of Thrones people, that the way that ended, because in so many ways the reason it was like, wow, there's going to be this queen and she's going to do things finally right, and then she gets the final moment and destroys the entire King's Landing, and then once she destroys it, literally butchers all the innocent people, and it's just a terrible way to end it. But you will know the caliber of leader that you are when you are given full power. That really demonstrates the characteristics of true leaders. When you give somebody power, how do they move? Who do they become? Who do they become? I've seen and I've given power to individuals, and I've seen how that power corrupts them. I've seen it because their consciousness hasn't arrived to a place of humility. And as a result, they take on the position and the power, and, all of a sudden it's I versus we, and that's exactly what happened inside of the Games of Thrones idea, but all that to say that, yeah.
Just real quick, was it completely out of nowhere that happened, or you could see it seated?
I mean,
in the character leading up to that?
that's a great question. She certainly showed a lot of moments of mercy throughout, which is why all these great men were supporting her, and they were like backing her up, and literally they had come from all the kingdoms to back her up because she was supposed to demonstrate a new way forward. And she constantly showed mercy, and at the end she was asked to show mercy again, and she just had it, and she just goes off the deep end with her dragon, and just,
Jeez.
you know, they had surrendered, and yet they friggin' destroyed the entire thing. And then after it was destroyed, all the innocent people, they just told all the troops to just start slicing them up.
So, you know how like in the hero's journey, there always has to be like a good story, always kind of brings us fully through the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think like the writer kind of missed it? Like Like, you get what I'm saying? What I'm asking?
No, I was trying to.
Yeah, it's just like a good story comes to completion, right? Did the story not come to completion? We don't need to spend too much time.
Well,
here,
in a
but
certain way, I think it depicts this idea of that absolute power has the tendency to corrupt, and that
you just didn't like the outcome.
Right.
But that is the outcome
Yeah,
of the story,
yeah.
the completion.
Well, and then at the very end, the guy who didn't want to become king essentially kills her at the very end.
Okay, got it. So a little bit of redemption.
Yeah,
right
there's a
there in the
redemptive
story.
aspect at the very end, and he's the guy who wanted her to be the queen and for her to rule the whole thing. And at the end, when she orders everyone to get butchered, like he was really benevolent, Jon Snow. And at the end, when he realizes we just created a tyrant,
Got it.
then he has the poetic justice at the very end and an embrace, and the dagger goes in, and so maybe that's the redemptive aspect, that there's still hope, you know. But so as much as it wasn't maybe the best ending, I think there's certainly a lot of code in it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And so all of this in full power absolutely corrupts, or absolute power absolutely corrupts.
Yeah. I think it's a statement that has been demonstrated over and over again, and I'm hopeful that that it's not true all the way through.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because like before you got here earlier today, I was talking to Jerry, and we were talking about, I don't know, I went through this aspect of that wake up, clean up, grow up, and show up, right? And so oftentimes when we wake up, we want to kind of go straight into the show up, right? And we see this happen all the time, right?
Oh,
People just make the leap. They never cleaned up, so they never really grew up. And I'm at a place where with that show up, I like don't ask for that lightly, you know, because when I think about the Christ myth and how he had to show up, you know, his show up ends up being leading to him being crucified. I mean, what a task, right? To have to endure. And, you know, I believe there's that story where he's in the garden before and he's kind of lamenting, not, you know, like, does this really have to be the way? And, you know, but he follows out this instruction from the Christ light and, you know, walks through into that crucifixion, even though he could have talked his way out of it because, I mean, who he was, right?
Sure.
And, but he didn't, because that was the path that he surrendered to, right? That was the way life was guiding, the intelligence of life was guiding him into. So that was his show up. And I think about that and I'm like, man, I did not ask for my show up lightly. You know, it's just like, may God prepare me, right? Through the cleanup and the grow up work to equip me to be the leader I need to be. And that, you know, whenever that show up call comes, that I'll have the courage and the preparedness in my own being to walk through that. And, you know, that's not obviously to mean that I'm going to be asked to walk through something like what the Christ myth did, but it does speak to the gravity of it. And the question is, would you give your life for this? Right. And we were talking also about the movie Braveheart, right? Where it's like, you know, his show up walks him through this process, eventually leading to it costing him his life, right? In that movie. So it's a similar thing, though. It's like, what are you willing to die for? Like, are you really, if you stand for something, would you be willing to die for that thing? And that's a level of the show up. Or do you only show up because, you know, the vanity and the money and the things that are lavish about it? But the moment that the value and the, you know, the core essence of what you're doing really comes through, do you fold? Right. It's a, I mean, it's a whole other conversation inside of that, but it's like that, I think in that aspect of absolute power absolutely corrupts. It's like, I don't even ask for that. lightly because I know that of the responsibility it would require of me. I just ask that I be prepared before I arrive to that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a really deep conversation. And it feels to me that if you have always had this impulse, like you're here to do something different, unique, that somehow, you feel that you always knew that you were going to be a part of something greater. I think a lot of people have that sentiment that something special about me. And it's true and it's false, right? It's paradoxical.
Yeah, exactly.
It is authentic, for sure.
It's like you do have something special, and you're also
a
equal.
grain of sand.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of us.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if that is a sentiment that you have, there is a necessity, I believe, that you have to be willing to sort of die for it. I know that early on in this process for me, around 2013, right around there was this moment where I was going through the healing journey, and it was this cry for no mercy from God, in the sense that I had already at that point sort of figured out that that in order to become the greatest version of myself, I had to heal all the different things that were in my own life, as well as in my lineage, and that I needed to clean all that up, that I was going to be the person that was going to break those generational curses. And so I asked in a lot of ways for no mercy. And that process, I think, has been one that has carved me out, who has hollowed me out, and has arrived me to this place and this idea that today is a good day to die. Today is a good day to die. It's a mantra that I've been living with from that time period, because it's this idea that I lived well, I gave well, and I gave it all that I had, and I have no regret. And the only time that you can say that today is a good day to die is if you've done those things to that degree where in the confines of your silence that when you were getting your ass handed to you, you still got up and you still went. That despite the pain and the agony sometimes of the human journey, that you got up and you still went, you still showed up. And when you live in that fashion, when the great creator calls you back, it's like, okay, all my things are in order. I loved well with my children, my partners, and throughout my years, like I've lived a fulfilling life. I participated in my mission. I gave it to God. I participated in that. And I believe that great endeavors require that level of conviction. And I think it's that level of conviction that makes individuals like that magnetic, because you see why we love The Last Samurai, Braveheart, The Patriot, because it reveals that hero archetype, and it speaks to that mythos in us, that we have the same quality to die for what we believe. And the people that die for what they believe leave their mark on humanity. These are the wayshores and the poets and the seers that say, hey, this is what I believe, and as a result of that, I'm willing to die on the mountain for it. These are the people that color in our human story. And I believe that given the transition in this place that we're in, that's the level of conviction that is going to be required to deconstruct the matrix, right? That's the level of conviction, because this thing is not going to go away gently into the night. It's going to throw everything at us, and we must be willing to continue on in that fight.
Yeah, and in that theme of like what you become aware of depends on your level of development, right? I think that's where this merchant archetype has a domain, like at a higher level of development, right? Which is to say, like, you've grown up in understanding that money is just a tool. It's not the end all be all, right? The tool for what, right? It can help you create all manner of things. And when you come into a place of humility as a leader, and to truly connect to your own soul, your own being, to connect to your own soul is to connect to the body of humanity, right?
Yes, exactly.
You can utilize this tool of the resources, the money that you have, the influence that you have to serve humanity. And I feel like inside of that, you find this merchant archetype, right? Which is here to lead the way forward out of this mess that we've kind of gotten ourselves into. And I feel like that's kind of what your obviously your mission is, and the story that I believe, right? I believe what you believe in that sense, that there's an opportunity here for the merchants to one, wake up, clean up, grow up, and show up for our humanity right now. We need people who are showing the way, not just for the fancy glamour aspect of it, but for true meaning, for true depth. And I feel like that's one of the things you've spearheaded here with at this point, thousands of people who have been impacted through the work that you're doing, from the builds out in Ensenada and showing the way with that. And you know, the people that you've mentored, the events, it's like all of it to kind of move people towards this ideal of living out their merchant archetype, their merchant, right? Because we're all here in business. We can all participate in this power structure and yeah, make an adventure out of this lifetime.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. It is. It is a great adventure, and it's a time for the merchants to wake up, to remember why you're here and what your role is. And this merchant archetype, again, it's something that does not exist right now. And what we are bringing forward, Giving Business Soul, is saying, here's this archetype that was lost that can literally help you transform the way that you show up as an entrepreneur, or business can be used as a force for good. And it's going to be through these merchants who begin to do this kind of work and who are really ready to take a stand. And what we are moving to next year is that this year I've mentored about 12 merchants. And next year we're going to be launching the Merchant Council. And this is going to be a big call for individuals who are hearing this podcast, who are hearing these messages, and that they understand that they are giants, that they're done fucking around, that they're done playing this money game, and understand that there's something greater. If that's you, then chances are you're a part of this new human story. You have this archetype that keeps sort of poking at you in your silence and telling you, hey, there's something greater that you can use your business for. And if that is sort of what you hear in the confines of your own silence, this merchant archetype is probably what you've been waiting for. That because to be a merchant is to be strong, to be fearless, to feel that sense of invincibility, that we are going up against Goliath as David. But what we have in our slingshot is this new way forward, this philosophy that can begin this new human story. And that, to me, seems to be a great story to participate in. It's a great adventure. It's either you do that or you just continue to provide and become a part of this old narrative and part of the demise of our humanity. There's an interesting quote or an interesting line in the book of Revelation. I believe it's 21:18. But it actually talks about merchants in there. And it's a really fascinating line if you read through that. But it says that the merchants were the great men and women of the earth. And it was because of their deceit that the whole world came to an end. You know, and that's such an interesting line, you know, because at that point when they're speaking about that, they're seeing Babylon sort of come to an end, you know, and it's fallen apart, and, you know, brimstone and fire. And the merchants all of a sudden are watching the destruction of the planet, and they start to weep and they start to mourn, because the realization comes in that, oh my gosh, everything that we've ever accumulated had actually come from the earth, had come from the Great Mother. All the resources to do what we've done had actually come from her. And now, because of our ignorance, because of our lack of understanding of how important we were to society, now we're mourning and weeping because this whole thing is coming to an end. And I think that indicates what can happen if we do not wake up as merchants, if we do not take on this responsibility that we have as creative agents, as individuals that feel like we're here to live out a greater story, a higher story. And that's what our opportunity is. It's either we follow that timeline or recreate the one that Giving Business Soul is saying, hey, there's this other way. And if we wake up into it,
Yeah, and it just gives meaning.
Yeah.
Right? Myth of meaning. And, you know, to kind of ground the merchant, I remember early on when I've started to understand this archetype and the limited resources that we have to understand, right? Because it's like Francisco's saying, it's hard to find any information on this merchant archetype. But it does have roots in Egypt. And I remember one of these things that I read was that merchants were like second or third to the pharaohs out in Egypt. And they were actually known as merchant priests. And their responsibilities was that they understood that the gifts afforded through commerce, which is business, allowed them to maintain peace throughout the kingdom. You can imagine these very archaic times where it was easy to go to war over resources. Merchants knew that instead of going to war over resources, we can use business, commerce, in order to trade and barter goods and services. And in doing that, in trading, in utilizing the gifts afforded by commerce, we could maintain peace across the land. Which right there, I felt like I tapped into like an ideal of the merchant, to be able to utilize our gifts, our talents. It's like, how many creatives do we have? How many influencers, people with incredible talent and know-how, and just able to move agendas, like, and that energy being used in order to help maintain peace across the land, and in order to be able to alleviate pain and suffering in certain areas of our society. But that's just simply who we are, and that is our role as a merchant, right? And if anybody's hearing and you haven't been out to one of the builds out in Ensenada where we go and build homes for women and children, right? It's like this, we use the profits that we earn through the business to help fund homes for women and children. When you go and experience that, it really taps you into this deep message of what's possible, the ability to transform a family's life over just the span of 2-3 days, right? And you see inside of that is a seed of this ideal of the merchant, of what's possible when we go beyond just the selfish aspect of the vanity and the recognition that we gain by making certain X amount of money. It's like there's a deeper purpose behind it. And yeah, I mean, it's an enriching experience. It's like sometimes there's one thing to talk to you about it, and it's another thing to actually be out there and experience being there, right? And doing this type of work. And you realize that it doesn't have to negate what you do in the world. It doesn't have to negate the business. It doesn't have to negate profits. It simply gives you a better use for the money. Honestly, like there's been times in the last few years that when I gain access to certain resources and I realize like, this is literally just numbers in my bank account, right? It's like it maybe shift little numbers around, and I realize this doesn't solve any of my biggest problems. And so it's like we realize that, and I can only imagine for somebody who has profits in volume, like how empty that can still be, right? We're saying you can use a portion of those profits to actually pave out a path to your own adventure, right, in life, where you can do something that really counts, right, and speaks for something.
And I think it's really something to take on, that merchants, entrepreneurs have always, or maybe the last 2 times, have been at the tip of the spear of a renaissance. Right. What I mean by a renaissance is sort of an emergence of an entirely new society, new way of being. The merchants, if you remember correctly, during the Italian Renaissance, were the individuals that were providing the artists, the sculptors, the poets, the storytellers, and it was through their financial support of the merchants supporting these artists that the artists started to paint and visualize and create an entirely new sort of society, and that's what's needed now, right? It's like these merchants, those individuals like ourselves who are waking up and beginning to use business in that way. Not only will we uplift the communities where we direct a portion of those profits, but also by supporting the hero archetypes, individuals who say, hey, there's this idea that I got where we can create this great thing for humanity, or what about this way forward? Well, look at this architecture, look at this, and then the patron support those artists, because artists are literally the way showers.
Right. It's like the mythos,
Yes.
right? It's like the artists have the vision,
Exactly.
right? And then the logos are individuals who are astute in business, for
Yeah.
example, right? And it's like business goes hand in hand with vision,
Exactly.
right? And that's what we're saying. If you can bridge both in your own life, you can realize that vision that's in the mythos, in the soul aspect of your being, and ground that vision through your efforts, through your work, and materialize it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
kinda what
cool.
you're
Yeah.
saying.
And I see, like, I'll, when I complete the book, The Rebirth of the Merchant, where I'll be bringing to human awareness the characteristics of the archetype as well as the blueprint for the Violet organization. The next book will actually be called The Age of Patronism. And it's Giving Business Soul the Age of Patronism, where the merchants who have woken up, who have adopted and integrated this philosophy, will start to become patrons of the arts, of the people who want to begin the visualization of the new human story, and the more that the merchants support that, it's like that gets completely colored in. And now that new renaissance starts to take hold, because, we are in that phase where in that renaissance that took place in the Italian era was where we broke out from the church. The church had such a stronghold, the Holy Roman Catholic Church, that had corrupted down to the core. The merchants said, "Hey, this is terrible. They are throttling human progress and innovation. You can't do anything, that is opposing that thing." And science in the Western world was dead, And these guys said, "No more." And they started to, break out of that by supporting these artists who were depicting a new way. And just in that same way where we broke out of the church to go into government, and that's what that Renaissance provided, and the merchants assisted in. It's here we are 300 years later, practically saying, okay, that there is now a new Renaissance. And again, who's going to be at the tip of the spear creating that? It's going to be the merchants, individuals who are devoted to the light. That's what the representation of the merchant is, individuals who are devoted to the light. Devotees of the light,
And the light is your own consciousness.
Yeah,
It's your
I mean,
own
it's
God self.
like exactly. Every human has the Holy Spirit. It's depicted in every major religion. You can call that the Christ light, the Holy Spirit. We all come with the spark, and that's what you need to, be a devotee of that light. And the only way to do that, again, is you have to take the adventure inward to bring that light to the forefront.
I remember in my own process, kind of when I identified that, like this eternal flame inside of our own being.
Yeah.
And although, maybe I abused my body before I came to this knowledge, that flame had been dampened a little bit, a little faint light. And what a precious thing it is to contact that inner light and to realize that it could never be extinguished, for as long as I'm within this body, it's there. And to go through this process, this inner work terrain, to find that inner flame, and then to learn how to fan the flame and add tinder and fuel and, to really build it up to a fire, right? It's been the most incredible journey, but it's like, that's I feel like what you're speaking to, the devotee to the light, which is this eternal aspect of our being that is living out through us, right? This is a vehicle for this light, and this is our unique genetics that we come with, but there's this, what a gift it is to be in this body, and can we accomplish in this lifetime when that light fully, I'm going to use the word kind of dramatic, when that light fully incarnates through the physical body. Like that's a big question, because that, for a lot of people, that light never makes it all the way through. And it's a sad fact that it is that way, that people go their entire life never making contact with that inner part of themselves that is sacred, that is beyond what society has kind of dictated. And this is the reason why we're distracted by it, or why the system pulls us out of our body, pulls us really, through all the different pleasures and dopamine hits, all these things to get our attention outside. Because if we go inside and we tap that potential, we realize, wow, what a great source of power here. right? And it's like that idea when you find it and you truly come into the embodiment of it, that's where you get that terminology of like till death do us part,
Yeah.
right? Because there's been an internal marriage between the soul and the body, and nothing can take that away from you, right? Till death. And it sounds dramatic, but it is an incredible experience to tap that knowing, right?
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And again, you can hear the mythos all intertwined. You know, just to kind of add to what I mentioned earlier, you can hear the mythos all intertwined in what I'm saying right now, in the sense that the language I'm using is analogy, an inner flame,
Right.
right? It's like an inner flame isn't anything that, you know, it's like the logos would be like, what are you talking about,
What
inner
is
flame?
inner
But the
flame?
mythos can conceptualize that and realize there's a truth behind
Right.
that.
Yeah, that's well said. I feel like that's the whole game, right? It's like, okay, so we know that from all the religions that we have a divine spark, and that divine spark is found inside of us. And so, like you were saying, the matrix and the construct, the game, it's designed to essentially pull your attention outside of you so that you don't begin the quest to come inside of you. And although all the great teachers and the religious figures and all the great religions were all pointing in the direction of inside, you know, but yet the matrix that's the game.
It seduces
It
us.
seduces you to continue to keep your attention, but that's by design as well. And just as evil as it may appear, also a perfect design, because at some point you just fatigue yourself so much in the pursuit of those different things that we don't actually ever make our way inward. Or at some point you exhaust yourself so much that, you know, you say, okay, now I'm ready to come inward now. And you finally, like the illusion of the outside world finally comes to an end. It's like, okay, I'm going to now begin the traversion of this inner world. And so that's, I think, an important element to understand. Like, that's the game, right? And so I think the other aspect to understand is that certainly we all come in with this divine spark, and we also come in with our own sacred wound, right? So we come in already sort of exhibiting one of the great human wounds, and that wound can be the wound of shame. That could be the wound of guilt, separation, rejection. But we come in, and the role I feel that we have made with God was that we are emissaries of light. We are emissaries of God. And our work is to transform that wound that we also come in with love, you know? And when we begin the process of turning that wound into love and into light, you know, this begins the real process of activating this code that's within us. And in order to do that, it's like we have to take the direction of what all the greats have said. It's like, come within. That's where the wound is, and that's also where the Christic light is also. And when you go into the adventure of knowing thyself and transmuting that pain into love and into light, we start to bring out our evolutionary potential. And I feel like what's really happening now, again, in this time of synthesis and better knowledge, better information, we're just decoding this entire thing, you know, and this is a huge element of it. And I believe it's in complete alignment to what the great mystical traditions and wisdom traditions and religious traditions have really been saying. Where do we go from here?
Mm. There was a thought I was trailing too, but I'm kind of at a standstill.
Yeah. But I think that's a nice element, though, is just kind of realizing kind of like the overall game. You know, I think when you can understand the overall game, it's like, okay, I get the game, you know, and it's a great design.
And you begin where you are, you know? It's like, I think sometimes if you look at the big mountain, you're like, oh my God, how are we ever going to
Sure.
accomplish that? But he's like, that Lao Tzu quote, right? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. It's like, what can you do today, right? You don't have to be like the people that you see in the world stage. You don't have to be like Francisco. You don't have to be like me. You just begin where you
Right.
are right now at this time to begin your path, to begin taking the first few steps that eventually lead you out into the bigger story. It prepares you the path, right? Everybody wants to get to the destination. It's like, again, don't ask for your show up lightly. Enjoy the journey, extract the most out of it. There's so much wisdom with where you are right now, right? And it's just simply a growing up process. It's a very gradual thing. And you realize, like, to that point that you made earlier, right? You'll say thank you to these challenges that you're around. It's like this idea you can't transform by hating something, right? It's like you can only transform by loving it into wholeness. That's the only way. You guys, if you hate something, you push it away. If you love where you are, you transform it. You're literally integrating it and moving it to a higher octave. But I think oftentimes we're just pushing these things away, our transformation, by keeping it on the outside, staying in control, and
Information too is just like, it's all love and light, and I'm just gonna not go to my family functions because they're not awakened. It's just also faulty information in so many ways, because if you really understood the game, you would actually be going towards those challenges, right? You'd be going towards those relationships that are actually causing a lot of upset, a lot of trigger. And one thing that I certainly think is really powerful, especially if you are into this work, is understanding that that if you are going to get enhanced, or to bring on qualities of your ancestors and the qualities of the lineage, you have to do the work of sort of forgiving the parents, and releasing the judgments that you have with your father, releasing the judgments that you have with your mother. Because if you have judgments about the way they've done things and you haven't healed with them, meaning that, oh, I've forgiven them, but I'm still triggered by them, your body hasn't forgiven them. Okay. So if you still say, I forgive my parents, but I'm still triggered by my parents, that doesn't really align. I think if you really have forgiven your parents, there'll be no more trigger. And when you really have forgiven it, meaning it's no longer in your tissue, the issue is no longer in the tissue, then at that point you can begin to take on the good qualities that your parents possessed. Because if you don't, then the qualities that your father had that were actually really great qualities, those do not get passed on, right? Because you're blocking that out. And then the same thing with your mother. And once you can really let go in the body and forgive them deeply, and then it's like you pick up another layer of qualities and benefit in this journey. And it's a real necessity, instead of just like, oh, they're just low consciousness, and they are not awake, and they're still caught in their things or what have you.
Yeah, it's like if you're going to be a merchant, you need to be in full power, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it's necessary that you address these areas because, if not, you're in your weakness.
Yeah.
Because you just these disowned aspects of who you are, disowned aspects of your story.
Yeah.
Right. Where again, maybe the hate is a strong word, but you keep those things on the outside because you don't like them. You have to learn to embrace them, bring them into the equation. And, I feel like bringing it back maybe to the merchant and the merchant council, kind of where we're going with this thing. Our aspirations here in the next few months and moving into 2025 are to begin to form this council in a big way, because we understand that merchants are the ones who are making moves, right? And so the more that we can find counsel along like-minded individuals who we can collaborate with, do business with, this has a tremendous capacity to increase prosperity. We've seen it with the 12 merchants we have right now, just the way that they collaborate, the way they do deals, and just how that's already creating a tremendous amount of opportunity for them. But even for that, we can go a little bit deeper into some of these subjects. It's like, again, what you become aware of depends on your level of development. Sometimes it's some of these conversations, maybe there's some things in this conversation were a little bit too deep for people.
Yeah.
But it's like for others, we love that stuff, right? It's like, give me that stuff so I understand more clearly what my assignment is. Like, so I understand the story and my role in the story.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's where these merchants are really going to play a big role, and definitely looking forward to mentoring in that way and bringing content, bringing speakers to the fore so that we can all learn and embrace this kind of new narrative. Because the truth is right, like Giving Business Soul is one organization that's doing this type of work, but there's individuals all across the planet who are waking up to their own aspect of the story. We happen to be bringing through the merchant, and really in many ways want to bring forward a force, a tremendous force for God of like individuals who are doing great work, not only in business, but in the world. And so I'm excited for that, brother. I don't know if you want to comment on that. And
yeah, I mean, I
light.
think we're moving into the next phase for Giving Business Soul, and the phase that we're now in is really, I love that image that just came through as you were sharing that, but it's like creating a legion of soul-centered entrepreneurs who are using the power of business in the service of love. And that's really where we are now. It's like to bring individuals who believe what we believe, who want to be a part of a council of individuals that want to begin to bring this new way forward in business. And the way that we're going to add a tremendous amount of value to these merchants is not only bringing guest speakers that can speak in the domain of embodiment and health, but as well as into the domain of spirituality, into the domain of business, and having these be sort of the three pillars that we would be concentrating on in order so that we can just continue to become greater versions of ourselves. And one of the things that we share inside of the community here is this beautiful quote from Rilke where he says, "I want to be with those who know secret things or else alone." And the Merchant Council is where we will be sharing, but we will be sharing information, knowledge, and wisdom that is extremely empowering. Information and knowledge and wisdom that has come through hard toil and endeavor and effort to bring information and, again, this wisdom stream that is incredible. And I can clearly stand in that because I know that the 12 merchants that I counseled this year have grown exponentially as a result of it. And now that we have a basic template, now we want to bring out a 1-year program next year, launching in January, that's going to really give more blueprint, more of the land or the maps necessary to come into the pinnacle of your human potential, the maps necessary to begin to live at your absolute zenith. And we believe that they're ready, that people are ready to hear this message and understand that there is a methodology and a way of being. Yesterday, I had this pleasure of meeting a father-son combination of two business individuals that are running about 1,700 person organization in insurance.
Wow.
And, coming into the conversation with them and sharing with them the philosophy with Giving Business Soul, it's like immediately it was like, I want you to come do something with us, help our organization do what you're speaking about. The individuals are ready. The consciousness, I think, has expanded enough where people are going to say, hey, this sounds amazing. This feels amazing. I feel I feel what you're saying. I believe what you believe. I want in. And it was an amazing conversation last night of that sort. And I think for me, what that's starting to give me is indication that the time is now, that it's ready, that this message is ripe, and individuals are just waiting again for the clarion call to be presented the philosophy that's going to be needed. And so it's extremely exciting because there's been a lot of preparation to arrive to this place. Everything that has unfolded in my own personal journey with my own life and GBS It's been a slow, organic unfolding that cannot be rushed, that simply is instructing every single step of the way. And the instruction feels very clear that it's time to bring this council together.
Well, brother, I am honored to be able to do this work alongside you, to be able to bring it forward, to reach more lives, and to bring forth the impact that is possible through these merchants, man. And definitely more details here to come shortly.
Yep.
But I appreciate you having me on for the second episode of the second season. It's good to be back, bro. And so, yeah, brother.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here with me on the ride, on the journey, on the adventure. It's great to have have you here with me and to be a part of the front lines. And now we're just finding the others, and they're coming. I mean, we're having great success right now, a lot of expansion for GBS. But if you're listening to this message, anything that strike you inside of what you heard today, reach out, go to my Instagram, go to Jose's Instagram, reach out, ask how you can become a part of the community, how you can become a part of this new philosophy, this new human story that is wanting to emerge through entrepreneurs who have a higher template for business. If this is you, you've arrived. You've gotten to the right place. Like those individuals yesterday were asking me, who else is really like the way that you're describing things? I've never heard this, and these guys are big entrepreneurs, 9-figure entrepreneurs. And so all that to say that it's time. I'm excited, looking forward to bringing this new council. And so if this is one of you, certainly reach out. And with that, we bring this podcast episode to a close.
Awesome, brother. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Giving Business Soul podcast. If you want to learn more about the transformative work we're doing, please visit our website at givingbusinesssoul.com. Discover how you can make a difference in the world through your business while fulfilling your spirit, enhancing your health, vitality, and relationships. And until next time, stay inspired, my friends.